Will you take a look at that? Pretty pathetic, huh? Well, you never believe this, but that so-called fail of a movie you're looking at was once destined for greatness. And not just any greatness. That movie was a musical. A wonderfully classic Disney musical, oh yeah! This is that story. A story which straddles 2 millennia, kinda. Yet as we look at the dawn of the 21st century, something much more drastic happened than just a transition in millennia. That is the change that we saw in the Walt Disney Company, and more particularly Walt Disney Animation Studios, as we moved from the 90s into the 2000s. 1999 saw the release of 2 Disney animated features, Tarzan in June, which is considered the final piece of the Disney Renaissance, and the year ended with Fantasia 2000, a modern callback to Walt Disney's masterpiece, which became more of a respectable in-house achievement rather than a commercially viable one. Dinosaur was the first film of the new century and is fittingly the first 100% CGI animated Disney production, yet that also predominantly failed to capture an audience despite doing extremely well at the box office, because it's boring as hell. And then towards the end of 2000 came a film which set in motion Disney's general outlook for the next decade or so. A film which I personally really enjoy, and I know the majority of the population of this planet do too. However, it's a film stuck somewhere in limbo, often shunned by Disney, yet still not quite a cult classic. That film is, of course, The Emperor's New Groove.
What's the title?
The Emperor's New Groove.
I guess possibly the main issue with this film is that it appears nobody cares about it enough to have any real or valid opinion on why it has become such an undervalued and underappreciated Disney classic. And so I'm taking it upon myself to be that person, the person who answers the question on every naughty animation nerd's lips. Just how much of a mess really is The Emperor's New Groove, because in the end, the film's got a lot of things going for it. Kronk, for example. But in reality, it could have been so much more. As I already touched upon, it has the unfortunate fate of being placed at the very beginning of that most regrettable period of Disney history. With the release of Fantasia 2000, the Renaissance was well and truly over. This illustrious decade which banged out masterpiece after Alan Menken masterpiece, like all good things, had to come to an end. Instead, ushered in was a time gracefully named by some as post-Renaissance. Some of us give it a wholeheartedly less respectable title, and it begs the question, what really altered so drastically at Disney during this time?
This is the story of how I died.
To understand the death of the Renaissance in 1999, I guess we should really be looking to its more symbolic end a couple of years earlier in 1994, with the tragic loss of Disney president Frank Wells and the subsequent departure of Disney film head Jeffrey Katzenberg, who went on to found DreamWorks.
I look at the 3 of us and I figure this has got to be the dream team. Certainly it's my dream team.
That's not particularly important, but what is Disney CEO of the time Michael Eisner bringing in Joe Roth as his replacement, and with such a drastic change in leadership, naturally comes a want to change things up. To be honest, Roth didn't last very long, yet The Emperor's New Groove found itself caught up in a period when the studio had lost its predominant guidance in the form of Katzenberg, a time at which the standard Disney formula was being questioned, just as it had been back in the 70s after the death of Walt.
All the nudity, the gunplay. It's new for Disney.
Twist the bones and bend the back. Here to the Captain America, Mr.
For the sake of argument, we're of course sidelining The Rescuers Down Under. Renaissance Disney films consisted of the following aspects: a fantasized version of the past, romance, magic or surrealism, a Broadway-style score and songs, inspiration from previously existing source material. I am not just talking about fairy tales, of course there are some, yet we also have classic novels, a historical tale, a Greek myth, and a Shakespeare play, finally. I feel those final 2 are the real deal breakers here, music and source material. And that's before we even get into super important aspects such as design, direction and the actual storyline, because these are the things which stretch much further than your movie watching experience. Even if it's only a very small and even subconscious acknowledgement, you are most likely aware of the general stories of each of the Renaissance films before you ever saw them. These are classic tales which are told over and over again. Your parents likely read renditions of The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast to you as a child. Everyone knows Hercules is a demigod, Tarzan was raised by apes, and who doesn't study or perform Hamlet at school? These stories are ingrained in you forever, and the Disney films somewhat merely reinforce their importance. The songs you hear during these films are obviously new and unusual at first, yet it's only natural these stick with you long after you leave a movie theatre. In essence, your viewing of a Disney Renaissance film is merely a peek in your overall enjoyment of that story throughout your life, beginning long before and carrying on long after. Now, The Emperor's New Groove. If we look at the formula, we can definitely see a fantasized version of the past and magic throughout, yet the others, not so much if at all. Romance, in terms of Kuzco's romantic relationships, nada.
Yikes, and let me guess, you have a great personality.
The film has relatively zero basis in any story ever told previously, something we'll get onto in a minute. And the Broadway score?
Theme song guy.
Non-existent. I'm not going to completely disregard the opening number, Perfect World, yet that song is even further removed from a musical standpoint, as it is 100% diegetic. Not that that's a bad thing or entirely unheard of, just look at Ariel's Sisters or The Muses. Yet, for this argument, it's just another example of deviating from the formula. And the most painstakingly unfortunate consideration when looking at the soundtrack to The Emperor's New Groove is that it could have been, and so nearly was, a completely different story. Like, entirely different. I think it's about time we addressed the elephant in the room.
Francine, happy birthday.
Sting. Sting's involvement in The Emperor's New Groove is one of the greatest behind-the-scenes tales to come out of Disney in the last few decades. Sting was brought on by Disney to write songs for a new animated musical called Kingdom of the Sun. Yeah, you are still hearing this right. Musical.
Hello, Sting. This is Roger Allers from Walt Disney in Burbank.
He'd be following in the footsteps of Elton John and Phil Collins as one of the select few world-renowned artists to lend their musical talents to a Disney feature. Of course, he jumped at the chance.
I leapt at the idea, writing for Disney characters, writing funny songs, sad songs, love songs, that have nothing to do with my life.
Now, I cannot talk on his behalf, yet that may just have been one of the more regrettable decisions of his life. I don't know, maybe. Luckily for us, Sting's wife, Trudy Styler, was on hand throughout, through a deal made by Disney to produce a feature documentary on the production of the film. Such a documentary entitled The Sweatbox does exist in far uncharted corners of the internet, yet with Disney owning the distribution rights and the film painting a decidedly less than favourable picture of the studio, it rarely sees the light of day. Fitting when you consider it was named after Disney's original screening room fitted without air conditioning, where Walt would critique animators' work, causing them to sweat. The Sweatbox does provide unadulterated access into the film's production, and particularly Sting's involvement.
Look, I'll play the guitar, you fucking do what you do.
Including the, wait for it, 6 songs he originally penned for the initial version of the film. 6.
Having written 6 songs.
Now I'm just let that sink in as we look at one of the other drastic alterations which came about during the film's production. That little change in title.
To take a revenge on the sun.
Now I don't know about you, but realistically I think this was the correct choice. Kingdom of the Sun sounds even worse than The Emperor's New Groove. I mean, it certainly doesn't sound as fun. But in reality, Kingdom of the Sun would never have been as quote-unquote fun, nor the comedy we know today. And generally the entire plot, the characters, everything was different. The only thing which remained consistent was the South American setting and the character of Isma as the villain. There was also probably a llama in the original. Okay, the llama thing still happened.
The llama, they're on their own. I don't know what they're going to do with that.
Going back to our Disney formula, Kingdom of the Sun even ticks another of our boxes in that it was loosely based on an existing story, that being The Prince and the Pauper. The Emperor, named Manco, yet apparently still voiced by David Spade, discovers Pacha, the peasant voiced by Owen Wilson, who looks identical to him, and the two switch places.
Whoa. We're twins.
Impossible.
No, then I bet we're distant cousins, because we look exactly alike.
Isma wants to destroy the sun to retain her youth, which may be where the title comes from. She still turns Manco into a llama to teach him a lesson, and he also has a love interest in the form of llama herder Marta, voiced by Laura Prepon.
Oh, come on. You're not really going to listen to Llama Boy, are you?
The two of them end up defeating Isma, yada yada yada. It all sounds very Disney to me. That's because it is.
When I pitched the original story that I'd cooked up to Michael Eisner, he said it has all the elements of a classic Disney film.
In this Mark Twain-inspired, ancient world-based love interest featuring magical Broadway musical, everything in our formula would be satisfied. I'm not saying I would prefer this version because there's evidently a severe lack of Kronk. Yet, if you look at it from a commercially viable business standpoint, everything was pointing towards a successful film, featuring many songs.
Is it lunchtime yet?
Now, those numerous songs were unfortunately written by Sting and his collaborator David Hartley at a time when even The King of the Sun was still in the story development stage and everything was basically up in the air.
I was writing songs in the dark, really, based on sort of hearsay of what the film was going to be. There was no hard script.
And therefore it is uncertain how many would have made it into the final film had there not been such a massive direction change. Yet 3 of them are featured on the original soundtrack release, and Isma's song, Snuff Out the Light, is even fittingly on the Disney Villains album. At least Disney still does recognise them in some way. Aww. The soundtrack does feature 2 songs technically in the film, the aforementioned Perfect World and My Funny Friend and Me, which plays over the credits and is designed to represent Cusco and Patch's friendship. Thank God it isn't in the film, the tone would be completely off. Of my funny friend and me. But what do I know? It was nominated for an Oscar, rightly so. Probably the only recognition Sting ever got for this film. The thing with those 2 songs is that they were written years after the rest, at a time when it's evident from the sweatbox the last thing Sting wanted to be doing was working on a film which had neglected everything he'd produced previously.
Oh shit.
You can't say he wasn't dedicated to the project. He stood with The Emperor's New Groove to the very end.
But another part of me is very frustrated and just wants to sort of give up and say, you know, forget it, I want to go back to my life now.
Yet undoubtedly has rejected any further offers he may have received from Disney. He did work with DreamWorks though in 2007. Conspiracy? I think not.
So, Mr. Sting, thank you for being here.
Do not get me started on B-Movie. I guess the main point I'm trying to make here is that Disney were not yet at a place, back in the late 90s at least, to turn their back on this tried and tested formula for good.
But I think that the studio in recent years has really opened up and said, we don't want to keep making the same sort of film.
At least not in the way they did. And I say yes because it appears Disney has managed to rectify their mistakes and develop a new formula in recent years which have suited The Emperor's New Groove to a T.
All your favorite movies. I got movies that haven't even been released yet.
I am of course talking about the recent major success stories of Wreck-It Ralph and Zootopia. Their common ground is not just director Rich Moore, it is in fact how they have been moulded around a formula which could not have been further from that found in the Renaissance. Rather than a fantasized version of the past, they are both set in an up-to-date, modern, if still unconventional, society. Romance is sidelined almost entirely, at least in terms of the principal characters, and instead the emphasis is on the development of platonic relationships between our protagonists. Magic, relatively, is a no-show, and if we look at Zootopia at least, so is surrealism. Neither are musicals, and neither are based on previously known or established artistic works. They're practically the opposite of their successful predecessors, try saying that when drunk, and yet they've become just as successful, if not surpassing them. How? The answer again is not solely Rich Moore, it's the specific angle at which the filmmakers tackled these films from the get-go. They're jam-packed with visual gags, puns and pop culture references to the extent that if you remove them, you'd pretty much not have a film at all. And how they succeed so well is that nothing is half-arsed. They go out of the way to make sure you're laughing your arse off. Sure, we had a small taster of this 2 decades ago with The Lion King, Aladdin, Herc and even Hunchback, yet these are more nice refining touches rather than defining ambitions. When such situations appear in The Emperor's New Groove, however, they are neither. It is an unfortunate circumstance, yet I'm not entirely convinced it's a detrimental one. Let's get one thing straight. The Emperor's New Groove is hilarious. End of. Name me a traditionally animated Disney feature with more laugh-out-loud moments. You can't. It's impossible. In essence, it acts as a monumental piece of Disney history as it laid the groundworks for the likes of Zootopia and Wreck-It Ralph to follow in its comedic footsteps. So why does it fail? Well, I'm glad you asked, because we can finally get onto the big one, the discussion of the film's director.
Oh, then it's his fault. So, it was his fault. No.
Yes, it is. It's his.
I guess.
Or directors, as it were.
So I have a basic rule, which is it takes 2 people to direct one of these movies, Roger and Mark.
Unlike most of the Disney features which do in fact have 2 directors who share the credit and collaborate throughout production, The Emperor's New Groove has only one credited director by the name of Mark Dindal. Yet, one other man conceived the original film and worked as director on the project for 4 years. Roger Allers. Allers is best known for directing The Lion King. Get your head around that one, eh? I guess we could say that Allers was more involved in directing the Kingdom of the Sun portion, which never actually made it to our screens, and so it is entirely understandable why he does not receive a final director credit. And his version of the film, as we've discussed, looked very different to what we have today, and not just in story material but the entire tone and style of the film. Allers' Kingdom of the Sun was an epic picture, mixing elements of adventure, comedy, romance and mysticism, very much in the vein of The Lion King. Yet rewrite after redirection after rewrite led to Allers departing the project, the transition to The Emperor's New Groove, and Dindal taking over as the sole director.
Guards! Take him away!
Mark Dindal is now our single director.
He had previously worked on a bunch of films, beginning with The Fox and the Hound, yet this was the first of 2 Disney directing gigs. The second of which is Chicken Little. I'm not going there today, I don't have the willpower. Dindal, with the support of corporate, turned the film into the slapstick comedy we know, disregarding the epic scale it had previously gathered. Don't get me wrong, I'm not placing blame solely upon the director, and the issue here comes from a number of different catalysts, which sometimes become conflicting. Firstly, these gags and comedic scenarios were being placed upon a previously formed story. This is cartooning 101. Even in Walt states, you begin with the gag and you mould the story around said gag.
Approximately 200 sketches constituting a complete story outline. The story then moves into a conference room, where Walt Disney comes in to look it over. This removes any feeling of contrivance or unnecessary force being placed upon the comedic scenario. Yet the conflict arises when you compare a feature film such as The Emperor's New Groove to an animated short or Saturday morning cartoon. There's a difference in status here, a difference in class. You don't go to the theatre and expect to receive the same entertainment value you get on TV. And yet, whereas The Emperor's New Groove may run at 77 minutes, you're served a good portion of that through gags, which can't help but leave you feeling a little shortchanged. The one thing which saves the film, to some extent, is that the tone is wholly consistent, and it appears Dindal knew exactly what he wanted to achieve. The most similar previous Disney feature was Hercules, which suffers monumentally through its inability to settle upon a cohesive tone. The closest comparison I feel I can make, at least regarding its approach to comedy, is that the Muppets, with their self-aware fourth wall breaking characteristics. At least it appears Hollywood and the world can elicit some sort of opinion towards the Muppets. Negative or positive. Mostly negative. An opinion, nonetheless.
Maniacal laugh. Maniacal laugh.
In effect, The Emperor's New Groove is potentially the simplest of all Disney features. There's merely 4 characters, the principal of whom goes on a journey of self-realisation with an unsuspecting companion as they're pursued by the villains. There's not a great deal more to it, a comedic buddy road movie. And I feel where the movie suffers the most in terms of characterisation is that those 2 buddies are by far the least interesting out of the 4. Making an audience sympathise with someone who just isn't particularly appealing to begin with is never a short order, and that's what you have with Kuzco. He's a bastard, nobody likes a bastard. And then you pair him up with Patcher, who, no offence to John Goodman, is about as interesting as the Fox and the Hound too. These 2 are your main characters, you're doomed from the start. Luckily, opposite them we have possibly the greatest duo in all of Disneydom, Yzma and Kronk. Voiced by the legendary Eartha Kitt, it's not difficult to rank Yzma up there alongside the greatest of classic Disney villains. She may not necessarily be as ruthlessly evil as, say, Maleficent, yet the absurdity of her villainy puts her on a whole other level.
Pull the lever, Kronk.
Yzma's just fab. Enough said. Finally, Kronk, one of the, if not the funniest Disney characters of all time.
Oh, right. The poison for Kuzco. The poison chosen specially to kill Kuzco. Kuzco's poison.
Patrick Warburton's comic timing is unbeatable, and although he is altogether the height of ridiculous, you just can't help but fall in love with Kronk. Did I mention how much I love Kronk? This is the point I should probably mention Chicha, but as nobody else ever mentions Chicha in any respect, despite how phenomenal she is, I won't bother.
It happened on one of them zippity-doo-dah days.
It may appear as if Disney would rather shove The Emperor's New Groove into their consecrated vault, along with Song of the South and that segment from Make My Music, as if it never existed. Yet, for a couple of years, Disney actually attempted to build a brand around Kuzco and the gang. Luckily, the film came out at that period when direct-to-video sequels, etc. were all the rage, and Kronk, obviously the best thing to come out of the film, became the star of the ingeniously titled Kronk's New Groove. That is, of course, nothing special. None of the direct-to-videos are. follow-up TV series, The Emperor's New School, also graced the screens of Toon Disney in the early 2000s, a place where all those cartoon gags finally found their rightful home. And ultimately, Isma and Kronk have shown up in a couple of different places, namely Walt Disney World's Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom, and on board the Disney Cruise Line in Villains Tonight. At least they haven't given up on them entirely, yet.
Suddenly, I'm not so depressed.
Right now, in the year 2018, we even just got Funko Pops. And no, it isn't just one long ad for these things. At this rate, we'll likely get a live-action movie in the year 2030. But what was the point of this video again? Oh right. How much of a mess really is this film?
What are the odds that trapdoor leading me out here?
The actual finished film would possibly be best described just under 2 decades later as a wounded showpiece. As I hope I've made pretty evident, in essence, it ultimately became victim to its own flawed production process. A lack of clear direction from both the creative departments and corporate has left a film which is the accumulation of dozens of versions of what could have been. The adjustment from Kingdom of the Sun to The Emperor's New Groove is undoubtedly one of the most contorted in all the history of the Walt Disney Company. The storyline may indeed be weaker than other Disneys which have come prior and that may just be one of its greatest setbacks. Disney films, unlike all other studios in Hollywood, are so commonly compared to each other due to their naturally similar style and appeal. As we discussed, the original audience of The Emperor's New Groove would have been expecting a Broadway musical they'd become so accustomed to receiving during the Renaissance. It's not a surprise what appeared on the screen may have been disappointing. The best way to view The Emperor's New Groove is as its own individual entity, somewhat removed from the Disney animated canon, because ultimately, it's not a bad film at all. The characters are fun, the situations are comedic, the story may not be the tightest, but I really don't think it's supposed to be. And if I've learned anything, The Emperor's New Groove doesn't take itself too seriously, and neither should we.
Well, why didn't you just fucking say that in the first place?
In the quiet time of evening, when the stars assume their patterns.
I'm so proud of you guys.